in terms of participant, this is the largest participant we have today.
Really?
Great. Thanks everyone for coming.
Good to know.
For our next lecture, we plan to invite what you call it, the member of community. We want them to share how they call it maintain or develop their neighborhood, something like that. So we will have like a very different perspective. Most of the time, we invite scholars from university and research center around the world. So next time we also want to hear from community itself about how they,
Of course.
yeah,
The real world.
Yeah, the real world. Yeah. Okay, I think the time is, yeah, we want to stick about 1.5 hours, so we will finish at 12 because today is Friday and
Friday, yeah.
people usually have to go to Friday prayer at 12. Okay, so I will hand it to Bella. Silakan Mbak Bella.
I think Nabila's image seems frozen. Maybe she lost her connection.
Halo Bella. Halo Bella. Okay. While we wait for Bella, maybe Mas Heri can talk a little bit about our program, our lecture, Mas Heri.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mas Rusli. Sorry, there is a little bit trouble here. We still adjust about that. Okay, good morning, everybody, especially for Dorina and also for Salsabila. First of all, I would like to introduce the Research Center for Population in LIPI. In our center, we have four we call research cluster, and then one of research cluster, namely penduduk and lingkungan, population and environment. In this research cluster, there are researchers interested on rural, urban, forest, and etc. But I think in this occasion, the researcher who interested on issues of urban, they have, I say earlier about the what so-called monthly urban lecture. The monthly urban lecture usually give opportunity to academic, researcher, NGO activists who have research in Southeast Asia or Indonesia or whatever about the urban issues. If we talk about urban issues, actually very broad, yeah. I think in the first urban lecture, I remember we discussed about the role of religion in urban life, and others lecture we talk about the waste management and etc. Meaning to say, if we talk about urban, there is a complex situation, and of course, in that complex situation, we would like to understand from different perspective related with urban issues. That's why we open the urban lecture with not really strict theme, but whatever theme or issues related with the urban situation. And we do hope this urban lecture will continue monthly and always invite scholars, NGO activists who interested with the issues on urban. And then I heard this today lecture will be very interesting about the policy of transportation. I heard about that. And then, of course, we would like to learn from you, Dorina, about your research. And then, so we also can compare with our situation in Indonesia. And actually, personally, I interested about what so-called policy transfer, yeah, because I truly believe there is no neutral about policy. Yeah, it always the politics, economy, and cultural background will affect the policy. Yeah, I remember how Indonesia get so many train from Japan, and but of course there is a different habit of people, or also the policy how to treatment the train from Japan in the Indonesian context. Yeah, and I think of course we would like to learn from others case studies. Yeah, from you or from other participants. I think that's all. Again, thank you for Dorina and also Sahnas to be a host of this meeting. Enjoy discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Bapak Heri, for your speech and for kicking off our event today, the 6th Urban Lecture Series. Well, everybody, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 6th Urban Lecture Series by Research Center for Population at LIPI. First of all, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm the host of our lecture today. My name is Syahnas Nabila Fuadi, but just simply call me Bella. I work as a lecturer at ITERA, Institut Teknologi Sumatera, one of the newest state institute in South Lampung, Indonesia. And I teach at the Urban and Regional Planning Study Program. But currently I'm living in Vienna, Austria, to continue my doctoral studies at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, or BOKU University, under the Institute for Transport Studies. It is an honor for me to be involved in the Urban Lecture Series held by LIPI, Research Center for Populations, because as we know, LIPI is one of the government institutions that is very committed to developing research in the field of science and technology, and involves many parties consisting of multidisciplinary science with various professional backgrounds from various cities and countries to produce and also implement knowledge from the research that is very useful in supporting SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, in Indonesia in particularly, and the world in generally. By the way, this Urban Lecture Series is one of routine event or activity of the Research Center for Population from LIPI, which is held every month. This activity presented several keynote speakers with contextual materials related to the developing urban studies. Well, on this super excited morning, I would like to say hello to our keynote speaker, Dr. Dorina Pojani. Hi, Dorina.
Hi.
Yeah, Dorina works at the University of Queensland in Australia as a senior lecturer and of course researcher. I've read her books and read some of her publications, so I'm really happy to see you finally, Dorina, even though virtually. And I would also like to welcome Pak Dr. Heri Yogaswara, MA, the head of the Research Center for Population of LIPI. Good morning, Pak Heri. It's great to have you here with us today. And of course, our moderator today, Bapak Rusli Cahyadi, PhD. Hello there, Mas Rusli. Mas Rusli is a senior researcher at the Research Center for Population at LIPI. All right, Dorina Pojani, our speaker today, will present a very interesting lecture. The topic would be policy transfer, diffusions, and mobility in terms of planning for sustainable urban transport in Southeast Asia. But before Dorina will deliver the lecture, maybe I will try to give a general overview of the topic that will be discussed later today. Many urban areas in the world are becoming increasingly automobile dominated and less sustainable. Urban transport problems are messy and, let's say, weak. Congestion has come to be the defining feature of many cities worldwide. At the same time, transport is crucial to a more sustainable and more human urban future. The need to develop more sustainable urban transport is now more important than ever before. In recent decades, cities have experienced a rapid growth in transport-related externalities, including air pollution, traffic congestions, accident, noise pollution, climate change, and maybe lack of accessibility to the poor communities. The need to take action is well recognized, but also too often governance agreements and the symbolism attached to automobility stand in the way. In many cities, a combination of weak administrative arrangement, limited planning capacity, and lack of coordination between land use and transport policy making prevails, which together inhibits the development of more innovative, integrated, and sustainable policies. Most often, transport tasks are spread across the myriad of agencies, especially in large metropolitan areas which contain several local governments, where they are granted a real decision-making power. These institutions often have differing ideologies and a lot of area of focus. Comprehensive and also integrated long-term visions for sustainable transport are rare. In many cases, although transportation planning and management may be devolved at the local level, municipalities lack of the budget to fulfill their transport-related responsibilities. In many larger cities, transport governance is maybe particularly problematic, not only due to the scale of the issues, but also because larger cities often include intra-urban as well as inter-urban transport infrastructure and services, which is typically overseen by national and maybe state agencies, and it leading to conflict and some of inefficiencies. And mentioned in Dorina's book, everyone with an urban planning background maybe has heard of concepts to solve a crucial urban transport problem I've mentioned before. The concepts are, maybe you already well known, like the transit metropolis concept, the walkable city, the smart city, the livable city, green city, zero carbon city, the happy city, and etc. But the problem is that only bits of the solution are being implemented in the cities that most need them, and the majority of which are located in the global south. But why? Why? How about the other cities, maybe in Asia or Southeast Asia, which consists mostly of developing countries? How transport policy becomes very important as a driver, or let's say generator, and also a basis in planning a sustainable urban transport system. The dynamic development of the city ultimately encourages many adjustments in various aspects of planning, including policy. Some literatures defined and examined a lot of issues related to the policy transfer in urban transport planning. From Dorina's paper, I also know that policy transfer is concerned with how and why knowledge about policies, administrative arrangement, institution, and ideas in one political system, either in the past or present, is used in the development of policies, administrative arrangement, institution, and ideas in other political system. There are a lot of policy transfer issues, but among all the planning policy transfer issues, the effectiveness of urban transport system has become a central concern everywhere, especially in some countries in Southeast Asia, which are still facing the same or maybe similar urban transport problems. They are, let's say, crowded. We know a lot of countries in Southeast Asia are crowded and have congested, and also have a lot of skyscrapers, mall, shops, and homes placed alongside the street or roads, and also a lot of highway in the city center. Each capital city of the countries in Southeast Asia is the center of respective countries' socio-economic activities and conditions. Dorina's lecture today will examine issues related to policy transfer and diffusions in urban transport planning and in the metropolitan regions of maybe four, if I'm not mistaken, four major capitals in Southeast Asia. And it will focus on who transferred the policy and why, and what kind of elements of policy are transferred, and also maybe what kind of diffusion or what are the diffusion or that appears or is finally applied as an impact of or transport planning policy transfer in urban transportation. Well, perhaps that's all I can say as an overview. Of course, Dorina will be more detailed and depth in her upcoming lecture. So now I will invite our moderator, Mas Rusli Cahyadi, PhD, to lead and guide the lecture and discussion today. Mas Rusli Cahyadi is a senior researcher at LIPI's Research Center for Populations. He studied anthropology and received his PhD in urban planning from the University of Queensland in Australia. So without any further ado, let's get started. Please welcome Mas Rusli Cahyadi, PhD.
Thank you, Bella. Good morning, all friends and colleagues, participants of the sixth series of P2K Urban Lecture. So before we start our event, I would like to express my condolence to colleagues and friends who are currently experiencing a difficult time due to the COVID-19 pandemic, whose family or friends are struggling with the disease and have lost loved ones. These are indeed a difficult time for all of us. So yeah, today we will hear a discussion about policy transfer, diffusion and mobility in the context of sustainable urban transportation planning. I think Bella already mentioned a bit about the topic. So I want to have Dorina to start the presentation. We will aim to finish our discussion today at 12. So yeah, I think Dorina can have more or less 30 minutes to present. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to give a presentation to LIPI, and it's also enjoyable to get to see Rusli again, who left us a year ago, Rusli. And I see Tammy is among the attendants who's still with us. So that's also a pleasure to see. So what I'll do is I will share my screen and we'll go from there. Okay. All right. Can everyone see the screen okay?
Yeah, already.
Yeah? All right. So I will talk today about sustainable urban transport in Southeast Asia. But instead of the usual talks about transport that focus on how to make the city more sustainable, what modes are more sustainable, public transport, cycling, etc., walking, we all know that. I'll put a little bit of a different spin to my presentation. I'll do it from a different angle, that of policy transfer, diffusion, and mobility. To tell you a little bit about myself, I'm originally from Albania, which is a tiny country in Europe. Most of you will not have heard much about it, I expect. I lived for many years in the US, where I did part of my graduate studies as well. Then I completed my postdoctoral residency in the Netherlands, and then I moved to Australia. So all of that to say that I've had an opportunity to see how planning, transport planning in particular, works in different countries. And that sort of understanding is important when one focuses on the transfer of policies. I see that there is a comment in the chat box. I was wondering if it has to do with people not being able to see or hear. Oh, someone says Mother Teresa. Yes, Mother Teresa was Albania. That's right. That's right. So people have heard of Albania. Very glad to hear. Okay, so this presentation will be based on my latest book, which is called Planning for Sustainable Urban Transport in Southeast Asia, Policy Transfer, Diffusion, and Mobility. It was published by Springer. Unfortunately, it is not an open access book, but we do have it at the University of Queensland. Our library has a copy, so those of you who are graduates will be able to download it from there. So most of the book was researched, or all of the book was researched way before the pandemic hit. It would have been impossible to research it now because the interviews took place in Jakarta, in Kuala Lumpur, in Manila, and in Bangkok. And obviously now with the Australian borders closed, I wouldn't have been able to complete such a research. So I'm very thankful that I was able to do it when I did. And then I wrote most of the book while I was in Italy on sabbatical. That's why I put this slide here. It's a joke. It wasn't a writing retreat as such. It was my sabbatical. I was based at EWAV University in Venice, which is a good school of architecture and urban planning. They hosted me for 1 semester. And I came out of it with a completed book. So the premise of the book, like Nabila was saying when she introduced the topic earlier, is that by now, as planners, we know what the ingredients of a sustainable city are. That's why I'm not making my presentation about that. I mean, we've all heard of TOD, the transit metropolis, Copenhagenizing, as in making the city cyclable, the 15-minute city or 20-minute or 30-minute city, depending on who you ask, The walkable city, the happy city, smart city, green city, zero carbon city. It's like every planner or planning scholar out there has coined their own term, but they all come down to the same group of ingredients: medium density, compactness, reliance on public transit, and active transit, and so on and so forth. These issues are known. The problem is, why aren't these ingredients of sustainability reaching the places that need them the most? And those places tend to be most often located in the global south, but not always. I mean, here in Australia, I have to say, we still have long ways to go in terms of urban transport sustainability, as well as those of you who have been working in Australia or studying in Australia can tell you. I mean, we have a lot of car traffic, car dependency, pollution, and so on and so forth. It's all the more surprising that transport sustainability concepts, tools, and instruments are not reaching the countries that need them, because the world is full of these so-called globalizers and policy transferers, I call them, organizations like the World Bank, the UNDP, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. A lot of their activities nowadays focus exactly on that aspect, policy transfer, and yet the results are less than satisfactory. So that's what prompted me to engage in this research. So when I came to visit the cities, my case study cities, they're 4 large capital cities, the thing that struck me the most were the high levels of car traffic that existed in these cities. So these are photos that I took myself, and I feel that the sad part here is that the cities have come to be defined by their traffic and congestion. And the way I see it, my own background was in design, architectural design. So I care quite a lot about how things look, the visual aspects of a city, the aesthetics. And I feel a city should be more memorable because of its monuments or other characteristics, but not its traffic. And the reality is, not just these cities, but many cities in the world have come to be defined by their congestion. And this picture of Manila on the left, top left-hand side, is particularly striking because I feel there is also this big chicken here in the picture, which I feel almost adds insult to injury. Not only have the people have to battle with traffic daily, but also they have this big chicken that looks over them. I mean, that's just too much. So all of this situation got me thinking, what's happening here? Why are these cities not implementing the solutions they need? Are they simply not lacking, not having the money to implement the solutions? Or does this maybe depend on the institutions that are involved? Or are they perhaps looking for models elsewhere, but they're not looking in the right places? They're copying from the wrong places, like perhaps Jakarta is looking at other cities in Indonesia, or other cities in Indonesia are looking at Jakarta rather than looking at other places? Or are they looking at the right places, but sort of not understanding what the real ingredients are that make things work? Or are cities perhaps looking, but they're doing it via very short kind of trips, fact-finding missions, and then nothing comes out of those? And then what happens in the case of countries that were colonies in the past? Out of the 4 countries that I've studied, only Thailand has not been a colony. All the others have been colonized at one time or another. So my question was, well, are those countries still very much attached to the previous colonial powers, or are they looking to new mentors now? And if they're looking at new mentors, are those relationships equal, or have the countries entered into new neo-colonial relationships, perhaps? And what about all these globalizing forces we keep hearing about, such as education? International education is one globalizing force. People go outside of their own country, they get degrees in other countries. That's what I've done myself. And then if that happens unavoidably, maybe they bring some lessons to their own country. So is that happening? Have new alliances been formed along the way because of these new patterns of these new relationships? And when it comes to my case studies, the 4 cities that I'm looking at more in detail here, are they also looking at one another to draw lessons from, or are they only looking at more developed countries? So these were some of my questions when I started the research, the premise of the research, if you will. So the way I conducted this research was qualitative research. It's very difficult to study these matters in a quantitative way, try to quantify people's thoughts around policy transfer. One really needs to do it qualitatively, talking to people. So I conducted 80 personal interviews with people in the 4 cities, so 20 interviews per city. I had local assistants to help me, of course, because it's difficult to grapple with local languages and local cultures. So I was very grateful to have 4 wonderful fieldwork assistants, one in each of the cities. And so I came up with my research in book form. Initially, I thought I was just going to write maybe an article or 2, but it turned out that I had so much material, I ended up writing a whole book. So before I tell you the findings, the empirical portion of the research, I'd like to present a little bit the theory that guided the research. So what is policy transfer? Well, it's an emerging field of study, and it's sort of a subset of planning theory. It's part of planning, but political scientists and researchers in organizational studies, also human geographers, use policy transfer quite a lot to explain various phenomena that are happening around the world. The reality is that this is not a new concept. It's a new field of study, emerging field of study, but the concept of policy transfer is not new. I mean, the reality is that ideas have always traveled all around the world, and empires have been in great part responsible for a lot of policy transfer. In reality, most of the countries around the world have lived most of the time under some empire or another. My country, Albania, was until the beginning of the 20th century part of the Ottoman Empire, and it had been for a good 5 centuries. And Indonesia has been part of empires, and pretty much every country in the world, really, at one time or another. So ideas have moved around, but nowadays, with the internet and globalization, the travel speed has increased phenomenally. So that's what these images mean in my slide. If before ideas sort of floated slowly from one place to another, now they just diffuse at in real time. It's supersonic speed. Okay, so I've used the term policy transfer. That's what I'm using in this talk. But other disciplines call this this concept or this research area with other names. So you might encounter in the literature, you might encounter words like policy mobility, policy convergence, policy diffusion, lesson drawing, policy learning, bandwagoning, and knowledge transfer, depending on the scholars that are engaged in the research. They're not all completely synonymous, these terms. I mean, I use policy transfer sort of interchangeably with these other terms, but they're not totally identical. For example, policy mobility is sort of the pet theory of people in human geography. And policy mobility scholars will say that it's hard to trace policies. It's hard to say where a policy originated or where it landed, because policies make sort of these circuits around the globe, and every country keeps copying from another country. Every city copies from another city. So there is no beginning and end to policies, really. It's hard to pin down the origin of a concept. Policy convergence simply means that two places or two cities, two processes are becoming more similar over time. And this can happen on purpose or sometimes not exactly on purpose. Sort of different places do things in parallel without communicating to one another. Or maybe one place stays firm, but the other place comes closer to the first place. So that's convergent. And there is also divergence, the opposite of that. Policy diffusion is the case when ideas just sort of spread by osmosis. No one is really making an effort to borrow or to look at anyone else, but things just sort of spread through television, media, people moving around, and every place is sort of infected by the same idea. Lesson drawing, policy learning are more or less the same. It's they focus more on the learning process. So the scholars that are involved on those focus on the particular steps that lead to learning. Bandwagoning is when one particular idea becomes very popular and then other cities or other countries try to sort of adopt that idea so they look good. They look like they've sort of arrived and they're doing something that's internationally relevant. So sustainability is a case of bandwagoning, became a thing, and then every country started to use the word sustainability in their policy reports. And knowledge transfer more is used in organizational studies, so how organizations learn from one another, and it can be not necessarily planning agencies, but it can be even industries, cloth making industries or food industries. My focus will be on policy transfer here because I feel these other ways of studying the process are good, but it's only the scholars in policy transfer specifically that have provided research frameworks that help you conduct research. The other scholars, I feel they've been very strong on theory, but they don't really tell you, well, if you want to design a research study, how do you go about it? They just don't tell you. Whereas the policy transfer guys, they've really provided step-by-step instructions, which I have followed dutifully. So here is the framework I've used. And like I said, it's not something that I've personally invented. I've borrowed this from other scholars. It's a six facet or 6-point framework. And I talk about the drives for policy transfer. So that's the question, why? Why do people care to look elsewhere? Do they do it on purpose or do they do it because they're forced? For example, coerced by funding agencies, maybe a funder says, well, if you want X amount of money, then you have to look at my country where the funder comes from and do things the way we do things. So that's a type of coercion or some kind of mixture, maybe even osmosis is in the policy diffusion conceptualization. Then I look at the drivers of policy transfer. In other words, who engages in policy transfer? Is it planning practitioners? Is it mostly the private sector? Is it academia? And all of those actors obviously come to the table with certain roles, attitudes, and values, and a certain amount of resources. So I wanted to investigate those. Then, description of policy transfer. What elements are transferred here? Is it policies in their entirety, or is it only certain policy goals, but then the way you get there, the country figures it out by itself? Or is it certain planning tools? Is it particular projects, like you see a complete project, an actual building, and then the city says, oh, I want to do that. I want that in my city. Or programs. And then the direction of transfer. How are things moving around? Are they moving around within the same country or across countries, and which countries in particular? Or are maybe countries even looking at their own past? There are countries out there that have, or cities that have this nostalgia about past golden eras that they want to revive. So that's a type of policy transfer as well. Then very important point is the deterrents, the barriers to policy transfer. What are the constraints there? Well, sometimes the constraints are cognitive or psychological, cultural. So two countries just or cities, they just cannot see eye to eye. They're talking at cross purposes because the cultures are so different, they just can't do things the same way. Sometimes the barriers may be structural. The institutions are completely different. So both countries, a lender and a borrower, they know what needs to be done, but the institutional and legal framework simply doesn't match. So then things cannot penetrate. Or it can be a technical or technological lag. One country, typically the borrowing country, might be less technologically advanced, so they cannot borrow things that are way too advanced for their level. For example, if it's a very poor country where the use of credit cards is not common, then of course you cannot go and borrow some bike sharing scheme that requires the use of credit cards. Otherwise, no one can use it, that sort of thing. And then finally, an evaluation. The last point of the framework, the degree of transfer, has to do with an evaluation. So after all this process, what happened? To what degree were policies transferred? Can we talk about hard transfer, as in we can see something concrete that resulted from policy transfer? Or is it only some soft type of transfer where people change their mind? Maybe the process made them look at things in a different way, but there is no concrete outcome. Or complete failure, where things were tried and they just simply didn't work. So that's those were the 6 points I was interested looking at. And as you can see, all 6 elements of my framework start by D. I did that on purpose, not because of my name being Dorina, but it's just easier to remember that way, the 6D framework of policy transfer. So let me now get to the findings, really the meat of the research. So like I said, 4 capital cities, and I chose them on purpose because they're all capitals of the so-called cub tiger economies in Southeast Asia. So in the map here, I've got the original tiger economies, the 2 little islands, Hong Kong and Singapore, and then Taiwan and South Korea. And then Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Thailand are following in the same path, it seems like. And recently, I believe Vietnam has been added to the group of cub tigers, but I did not look at Hanoi. I just looked at 4 capitals here. So let me discuss now the findings. What were the drives for policy transfer in the region? And I'm going to present the findings on Jakarta mixed in with the findings from other countries, because this is how I did the research. I did it by topic rather than by case study. So I wanted to compare the cities, figure out similarities and differences. So for one thing, I noticed that in all the cities that I studied, the word sustainability was very important. So every report seemed to say sustainability this, sustainability that. Cities wanted to be seen like they were adopting sustainable transport policies. So that was one big reason for policy transfer. They were looking at other countries that had mentioned sustainability in their transport documents. Another important reason was money. So like they say, it's not nice to talk about money in a polite society, but the reality is that money determines a lot of policy transfer. So oftentimes when organizations like JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, I guess is called, JICA. So when they come with a pot of money and they're willing to fund some project, then countries just take it, or the World Bank. And because now we're in this neoliberal era, all the cities are competing with one another, not just within one nation, but even at the regional level or the global level. Every city wants to show a good image to the world, present a good face to the world. So that desire to show progressive image often drives policy transfer. Places try to look at what other countries have done so that they're able to compete, they stay competitive in the international arena. And the wealthier cities in the region, more often in Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur, organizations themselves had some money, typically had some money set aside for study tours abroad. And often those study tours were in destinations like Western Europe, sort of nice, more touristy cities in Western Europe, or Japan. Often the Japan tours were funded by JICA itself. But whenever those study tours happened, even though part of the tours always involved some play, I mean, there were a bit work tours, and then there was a lot of tourism kind of involved. But still, they made impressions on the participants. Often people came back with certain positive views about public transport. They would say, oh, we went to Amsterdam and we saw how wonderful the train system was. We wished we had the same over here, that kind of thing. And then finally, the internet has made things much, much easier. So a lot of people I interviewed, they're part of 10 or 20 Facebook groups. And no, I don't mean just friendship groups, but professional groups where they get news about public transport or various cycling groups, so they know what's going on elsewhere. And participants are at the international level now, as opposed to of these groups, as opposed to in the past where people just had professional networks within their own country. It's a different world now. So I'll stop for just a moment and take a look at the chat box. I see a couple of people have written questions. So Mohammed Reza says that he has a question. So shall I take questions now, or shall I wait for the end of the lecture? What do you recommend, Bruce and
it depends on how long your presentation will be. So I think you still have like 12 more minutes or 15 more minutes. So I think, I think we need to finish your presentation first, and then we have a question.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll wait. For the end. Okay. Moving on to the drivers of policy transfer. Well, I found that in all the countries that I studied, it was important to have a politician that guided a project. If there was no political champion for a project, projects just didn't happen. And that was the case for example, BRT projects, bus rapid transit in both Bangkok and Jakarta. There was political support. That's how those systems got up and running. I also noticed that local experts are now very, very knowledgeable. So it's not the scene that existed maybe 30, 40 years ago where countries did not have much technical capacity in-house. I felt that all the interviewees were talking the right talk. I mean, they knew quite a lot about the issues, and they knew where to look for innovation as well. They knew what the different groups that produce reports are, and they knew what websites to consult if they needed help. So local experts were acting as drivers of policy transfer themselves. And all the cities that I studied had this fairly large international student diaspora. So those were major drivers of policy transfer as well. Another group were the so-called technology mongers. I call them. These are representatives of organizations that are selling transport equipment or transport technology. For example, people that make and sell trains. Companies like, I don't know, Siemens in Austria and Germany. They come to the region to show their products. They go on tour around. So in a sense, they help diffuse technology or knowledge about technologies available. Then description of policy transfer. So there is this legend in an old biblical legend that shows this man who did not believe in the wounds, Jesus Christ's wounds in the body. He said, I won't believe this person has been wounded until I put my hand on the wound myself. So this was one of the apostles. The painting is by Caravaggio, the famous Italian painter, Baroque painter. And I presented it here because in a sense, when it comes to policy transfer, everyone is a bit like Thomas, a so-called doubting Thomas. So people want to see things with their own eyes to believe them, meaning that the kind of things that tend to be transferred are not written policies that are on paper, but elements of the city that are visible. Physical planning elements tend to have priority over invisible tools. Invisible tools and regulations are quite important, of course, as we know as planners, but because of this bias we have as human beings, we want to see things for ourselves to believe that something is possible. Then there is this physical planning, urban design bias that happens. And direction of policy transfer. Well, this is important in the region. I noticed that the role of the West is diminishing everywhere. I mean, countries in the West are still considered as a good role model, but for direct policy transfer, people are looking much more at the Asian region. There are these new Asian mentors that have emerged, and among those, the prime example, the prime mentor is Japan, unquestionable. But there are also countries now like South Korea. Singapore is a very important mentor within Southeast Asia in particular. And China, but with China, people seem to have more mixed feelings, mixed experience. But for some things, China has acted as a good mentor as well. When it comes to Europe, it's not the whole of Europe that it's looked at. It's more the so-called European Pentagon, so those countries sort of in the center of Europe, the classic, the wealthier Western European countries. Eastern Europe is not much of a role model. And Southern Europe is also less of a role model. North America is not considered a role model for sustainable urban transport because local experts in Southeast Asia are well aware that North America has so many of its own problems when it comes to urban sprawl and car dependency that it's really not worth looking in that direction for inspiration. Maybe it's only certain cities that have been particularly successful with some things like San Francisco or Portland or Vancouver, or maybe New York and DC. I mean, those are farther on the other, facing the other ocean. So distance also is a factor there. But yeah, generally North America is not much of a model. Australia, I felt, is considered a good, friendly neighbor. It's considered a good role model for some things. A lot of people brought up road safety, for example. People have come down here on study tours to see how we do road safety. But same thing, I mean, people realize that Australian cities also have problems in terms of sustainability, too many cars, a lot of urban sprawl. So I feel that if Australia didn't happen to be geographically located next to Southeast Asia, then maybe it wouldn't be a role model at all, much like North America is not a role model. I noticed that countries very rarely look at other places in the global south. Latin America, certain Latin American cities like Bogota and Curitiba in Brazil that have had good bus rapid transit systems, those are exceptions. But otherwise, it's not the case that anybody is looking at, say, the Middle East or Africa for inspiration within Southeast Asia. Capital cities tend to be the torchbearers when it comes to policy transfer. So it seems like everything needs to happen in the capital first and then diffuse in the rest of the nation. And whenever there is a case that another city does something first, like in the Philippines, Cebu ended up doing BRT before Manila. The people in Manila were almost offended. They were like, how can Cebu do something before we do it? Because they felt Manila as capital needs to set the tone. But then capitals, it means that capitals also have a responsibility to do things well, because if they implement policies that are just sort of half-baked, then the rest of the country copies those, and the rest of the country ends up making mistakes as well. And then I noticed that there is also some level of rivalry within the four cities that I studied, and there is some sort of unspoken hierarchy. I sense that Kuala Lumpur and Bangkok are considered as being ahead of the pack, and Jakarta and Manila as being somewhat more behind. But you can tell me if that's your perception as well. And like I said in the beginning, it's hard to measure these things quantitatively, but that's what was coming through from the interviews. So I've put the direction of policy transfer in a map so that it's a little bit clearer to visualize. So the arrows show the direction of transfer, and the countries that are shown in darker gray color are the ones that are more important for inspiration. So there is Tokyo, and then places like Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, like I mentioned, some parts of Western Europe, and then the countries in lighter gray color like Spain, in Southern Europe, China, Australia, some parts of the US are less of a role model. And then in Latin America and the whole continent, it's really only a couple of cities that are considered worth looking at. So that's where the circuits are. So the final sort of the lesson from looking at these circuits of mobility is that the direction of transfer still needs to go from wealthier countries to less wealthy countries, except that in the past, the wealthy countries were only Europe and North America, whereas now very wealthy countries, strong mentors have emerged within Asia itself. So Asian countries are looking at other Asian countries to learn and draw inspiration from. What are some of the deterrents to policy transfer, some of the barriers? Well, again, money is a barrier, of course. If the finances aren't there to implement certain policies, they just won't get done. Institutional barriers are huge. And I saw a lot of fragmentation, not enough coordination among policies and agencies. For example, Bangkok alone has a good, I think 13 or 14 transport agencies, so it's hard to even get everybody in a room, set a meeting with representatives from all of those agencies to try and coordinate urban transport programs and plans. In some cases, the legal framework isn't quite there, creates a barrier in itself, and it's somewhat difficult to change laws. I mean, it takes time, and there are many steps involved. Things like corruption, populism, clientelism are endemic in the region, unfortunately. I mean, we are all aware of those issues. There are also instances of apathy and inertia within organizations. There are people that would rather just things keep going as they are without rocking the boat too much. They just like to go to work every day, maybe collect their salary and go home, rather than have to engage in innovations, because those require more focus, more work. I mean, it's harder to do innovation than just keep the status quo. I noticed that there are bottlenecks, information bottlenecks in the region, with one organization sort of hoarding the information and not sharing. That happens quite a lot. As we know, the region is sort of in love with cars and motorcycles still, so it's hard to stir people, at the psychological, cultural level towards public transport and active transport. And we're also talking about fairly large, hot cities where it's hard to walk to work. A lot of people will not be able to walk to work. They need some kind of fast mode of transport to get there. In some cases, I've noticed that there's been an effort to sort of force policies by foreign organizations, force policies upon countries, though that's happening a lot less than in the past, because like I said, local experts have emancipated now. And finally, there is the issue of sustainable transport being a package. So one cannot expect to implement one bike lane over here, one bike sharing scheme over there, and resolve the problem. Everything needs to be coordinated. So cycling needs to work in concert with public transport, with a pedestrian network, with a park network. It needs to work in coordination with land use as well. Urban sprawl certainly doesn't help with if one wants to do public transport and make it sustainable and financially feasible. So that coordination is important there. And the cases of transfer I saw in the region so far were very fragmented, just bits and pieces here and there, rather than looking at things as a package. So, final point of my 6D framework, what's the degree of policy transfer? How much has actually happened in the region? Well, I feel, like I said, locals are very knowledgeable, but when it comes to transfer, I saw more instances of inspiration than action. And often people know what needs to be done, but implementation is patchy or is not happening at all. And when it happens, it's often that incompatible policies, mismatched tools are combined, and then that leads to transfer failure. So without adaptation to the local context, transfer will fail. That's my conclusion. So what's the way forward here? Well, I felt that the transfer of ideas, it's no longer a problem in the region. People know what needs to be done. my original hunch, my hypothesis was proved, was verified during the research. The problem is implementation, how to actually make things happen. And I put together this implementation framework, the implementation matrix. It's not something that I invented. Again, I borrowed it from other authors. I see it as relevant and interesting for the region because it combines the level of political conflict that exists in a city. It combines it with the level of policy ambiguity. So if we have high levels of policy ambiguity, it's not clear what policies need to be implemented, then we end up with experimental implementation, which the degree of which depends on the local conditions, or symbolic implementation that depends on the local coalitions, how much people can combine maybe NGOs and government, or several NGOs together, or NGOs and the private sector, they can combine to make something happen. And I felt that the level of implementation in the region at the moment is at the experimental and or symbolic level. The administrative implementation were the case where there are many political conflicts and there isn't much ambiguity about policy, so people know what needs to get done and they agree that needs to be done. This tends to be the province of places with very mature planning systems, such as maybe Northwestern Europe. Places like the Netherlands have this sort of system. So this is the ideal, but I see it as hard to achieve in Southeast Asia, given the local level of institutional fragmentation and the political conflicts that I saw in the region. So my hope is, and what I think is actually feasible, is that cities in the region, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Manila, and Bangkok, can achieve political type of style of implementation when it comes to transport sustainability. So that's the type of implementation that happens where people know what the goals are. They know what transport policies need to happen. They know they need to do better public transport. They know they need to do better cycling networks. They know they need to create better networks for pedestrians to use in the cities. But there is too much political conflict in the countries. So in those cases, the outcomes depend on political power. And I thought this style of implementation is in line with local cultures. Based on the research, it seemed like often in projects, there was one political champion that sort of took charge and cut through the red tape and alleviated the bureaucracy, made some phone calls, and that's how things happened. There is a risk to doing it that way. If a project hinges on just one particular individual, what if that person is voted out of office? What happens then? So that's the risk. But for projects that are small in size and can happen within one political term, within one mayoral term or one governor's term, then I think this is what could happen. Well, this was it for my part. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll take any questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Darina. Yeah, basically we have thank you for the clear and structured presentation. And basically we have a hint of the whole book here. So I think this is a good thing for us because most of us will have not the access to your book. But yeah, I think you already mentioned basically everything in the book. So we have one question from Pak Reza, and I would like to ask for Pak Reza to have the question, and please keep the question brief and concise, Pak Reza. Silakan, Pak Reza.
Thank you, moderator. Dorina, I was wondering uh, the context about Southeast Asia and Latin countries. Can you explain what to what extent transfer policy in particular countries, for instance, Indonesia and Vietnam, with the different national principle, you know, Indonesia as a republic and Vietnam as a communist, will affect the goals and the people behavior? And if transfer
Absolutely,
policy is a
yes. Yes, this is very,
and if
very
transfer
important.
policy is aspirational, inspirational lessons from Latin countries, what do you think
Mhm.
about it? Thank you.
Yeah. This is very, very important. The institutional context and the political context, whether a country is some kind of, it has some sort of authoritarian leadership or whether it's a democracy, that will change everything. In fact, so I did not study Vietnam in particular, but people were telling me things about Singapore and about China. So that was identified as a barrier to borrowing good policies from either Singapore or China. They felt that people felt that, well, those countries, I mean, they're doing some really good things when it comes to transport, urban transport. They're building all these rail networks and they're creating high density hubs around those rail networks. But those countries also have authoritarian governments that just tell people what to do. And say a country like Thailand, where they have a democratic system and stronger property rights for individuals, so we just cannot do that. Otherwise, we'd have people out in arms protesting on the street if their land is taken to build a train station. So that's why we cannot borrow just like that from Singapore. They were saying, so they were recognizing that, yeah, maybe the policies are good, but they just won't happen. That's why I said adaptation to the local context is the key. Like they say, in real estate is location, location, location. In policy transfer is adaptation, adaptation, adaptation.
Okay, Pak
One,
Reza.
one
Yeah,
more,
yeah, sure.
Pak and
Yeah, sure.
what we call, we have from lesson from Latin country. You know, they said it is an inspirational or aspirational study case because Curitiba or Barcelona, maybe in for example, maybe it's just only inspirational or maybe just only for aspirational from the people. So that it doesn't mean that in Indonesia in context maybe maybe it is just a little bit aspirational because we need it. It's not just all about inspiration from the Latin America, but you know we need it. It is just a basic need in our country, probably like that. What do you think about it?
So when it comes to Latin American countries, the borrowing was very specific. It had to do with bus rapid transit, BRT. That's why those countries were being mentioned, Curitiba and, or cities rather, not even whole countries, the cities, Curitiba and Bogota in Colombia. So Curitiba in Brazil and Bogota, the capital of Colombia. And in part, that kind of transfer had to do with the fact that both those cities had these very charismatic mayors who, once they stepped down from being mayors, they sort of went into these tours all around the world promoting the work that they had done. So that's how people in Southeast Asia got to hear sort of firsthand about those achievements. So it was very, very specific. And in that case, I wouldn't say it was aspirational. I think things actually happened. I mean, Bangkok managed to build a BRT line, not a system, but just a line. And the one line I've written on it, the one line is decent. I would say it offers good quality, but it's just a single line. So it's not like it can help a whole lot, a huge city like Bangkok. And Jakarta, of course, also has a BRT system, Transjakarta. So there was concrete implementation there. Whereas when it comes to Latin countries in Europe, like Barcelona came up in a couple of interviews. In that case, yes, it was more aspirational, and people were also saying that that concept of urban sustainability being a package, transport sustainability being a package. So they were saying Barcelona is a nice city, but not just because it has good buses. It's because it also has good public spaces, it has good buildings, it has other good amenities. So looking at the city as a whole rather than just transport elements.
Thank you, Dorina.
Yeah.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Pak
And I
Reza.
see
Yeah, we have another question from
Yeah.
Galuh. Yeah, so I invite Pak Galuh.
So, Galuh, would you like to read the question, or would you like me to read it? I cannot hear you for some reason. The is not coming through.
No, still no.
I can read the question.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
okay. I
maybe you
can read.
yeah, directly respond, Dorina.
Yes. So Galuh was asking about whether there was any sense of inferiority on part of borrowers, and if I found any evidence of post-colonialism in the responses. To be honest, I didn't. Maybe it was a function of the particular interviewees that agreed to participate in the study. But I didn't feel like there was a sense of inferiority. I felt they were all very, very knowledgeable. Even in a city like Manila, I felt like that was the most congested of the cities I studied. But I felt local experts were just up to date with what needs to be done. I mean, they all talked a good talk, and they were aware that it was very difficult to get things done because of local politics and financial constraints and institutional barriers. But I didn't feel like they thought, oh, we don't know as much. I mean, I felt the knowledge was there, the implementation is what was lacking. The ability to implement things through the existing institutions.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Dorina. Is there any other question? Maybe.
Yeah. Mas Rusli, we have a question from our viewers in YouTube. I don't know, either she or he is also in this Zoom meeting or not, but I'm trying to read it to you, Dorina. It's from Raut Bonita. Dear Dorina, it is very nice to be able to attend your lecture again. Maybe you know her. Dorina, could you please explain the correlation between neo-capitalism and transport problem in Global South? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the main problem we all know about, the problem that capitalism, unrestrained capitalism, brought in the Global South is car dependency. In Jakarta, I asked people when I visited, I asked, well, was Jakarta always this congested? What were people doing in the past? And they said, well, no, up to 30, 40 years ago, people were taking the bus or maybe even riding bicycles around. There weren't as many cars, or maybe they were riding the local paratransit vehicles, but it wasn't this level of congestion with cars. And what happened is Indonesia got richer at some point post Reformation, and then everyone wanted to have a taste of automobility, owning a car or possibly a motorcycle. So those personal transport vehicles, they come with freedom, of course. You can go wherever you want, whenever you want. They provide door-to-door travel. So that's sort of a cornerstone of capitalism, right? Promoting personal freedom. But the problem is they diminish our communal well-being. They pollute our air, they create congestion for everyone. So I think that's the closest connection. I think another thing that sort of very capitalistic relationships in the region have promoted is the idea of social status. So I think social status, the region, people were already status conscious in the region for a variety of reasons before. But I feel like now automobility has become another way to express status, whether you have a car or whether you have a motorcycle, and then what quality car that is or what quality motorcycle. So again, that's sort of a move away from more traditional, more egalitarian societies towards more individualistic, westernized, status conscious societies. And that's, I see that also as a consequence of capitalism, neoliberalism in the region. I mean, I don't know if you agree, if you live there, but that was my impression based on the research.
Yes, Dorina, thank you very much for your explanation. Yeah, I think I really agree with what you're saying. I think it's all correct, and everyone who has lived in Jakarta could relate to that condition. And I think it's being so it gets worsened by the condition where the public transport itself it doesn't give the people in the user of the public transport convenience and feeling of safety, those kind of things. Yeah, especially in times of pandemic right now. It's yeah, it's hard. Yeah, thank you very much, Rino, for the lecture today. It's very great to see you again. I used
Yes,
to
I
do your
hope.
lecture in planning studio. Yeah, I really enjoy that. Thank you very much, and also thank you, Mas Rosli and Ibu Sanas and everyone. Thank you very much.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you for coming.
Is
You're
there
welcome.
another question in YouTube, Bella?
So far it's only one question from Mbak Bonita,
Yeah,
and
maybe one final question from me, Dorina, before I hand it the space to Bella. So, considering Indonesian context in terms of politics, how our government system, funding, and then other socio-cultural aspect, how do you see Indonesia transportation in future?
Well, part of it will have to do with the country moving away from economic liberalism towards more policies that center on the needs of the people. And I shared my screen again, where I provided this sort of theoretical, or I've illustrated this, my theoretical conceptualization of what neoliberalism has done to transport in many countries. So we need to break these two vicious circles that interact in this image, where private automobility, so cars or motorcycles, are seen either as a necessity or as a status symbol. We need to break away from that if we are to move towards more sustainable transport.
Yeah, thank you, Dorina. So, is it possible for us to have your presentation, Dorina?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and for
I'll,
all
I'll
of
send it.
our audience, we will share this in our research center website later, so you can find it there. So yeah, I think we only have less than 10 minutes of the time. So I will hand this to Gila. Maybe you can have some.
all right. Is it still possible to have one question? Because we have still one question in chat room from Neng Yati, Ibu or Mbak. Yeah. Would you describe more detail what kind of implementation problem according to the policy actors to implement this policy?
I think what people were saying, I mean, a big problem in the region is was in the research was the lack of institutional coordination. There were too silos in the region, each institution working separate from other institutions. And transport just cannot work that way. It's too complex a problem for one single institution to go at it alone. So the transport office needs to collaborate with the land use office, needs to collaborate with the environmental ministry, needs to collaborate with the economics department. There are too many issues combined, and possibly even with urban design firms, to ensure that the outcomes are not just big engineering works, but they're human scale friendly, pretty to look at for people to use. So coordination is the big barrier. But also I see a need to convince politicians, powerful politicians, to champion particular problems, because it seems like that's the way things get done in the region, not just in Jakarta, but also in the other cities that I studied. If a mayor or governor wants put all of his weight, and usually is usually is a man, won't put all of his weight behind the project, then things just won't happen. Needs to be some kind of powerful guy to push things through. That seems to be the cultural practice in the local institutions, and so one needs to work within that, or in concert with that cultural grain rather than against it, if we are to see improvements in the short term.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Darina, for your answer. Mas Rusdi, maybe I can close these sessions. Thank you so much, Mas Rusli, for leading us to a very interactive discussion. And special thanks to Dorina Pajani, our speaker today. Thank you very much for the lecture you gave to us. It is very insightful and give us a lot of new knowledge and new experience, and encourage us to learn more and to get know more about urban transport planning, especially for all transport system aspect regarding to the economic, social, environmental. Even though we also have to think about a supply and demand, and it all need to be covered by policy, and it should be flexible to all time, in all time. I also want to say thanks once again. Thank you, Dorina. We really appreciate it. And I would like to say thank you for all the participants who joined the 6th Urban Lecture Series today. Thank you for all the colleagues who gave the questions and also the comments. Thank you very much, guys. Wishing you all the best in life. Please stay safe and healthy. See you in the next Urban Lecture Series. Goodbye. And before we close, maybe we can take some picture together. Please turn on your camera, and maybe Mbak Tria or Mbak Dwi can help us to capture the.
Okay, I will help.
All right, I will count. 1, 2, 3. All right, and the next slide. We have 4 slides. 1, 2, 3, and the third slides. All right, 1, 2, 3, and the last 1, 2, 3. All right, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you so much, Dorina.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for.
Thank you, Mas Rahadi.